I just want to give you guys some general tips and advice on fishing frogs if you haven't done it before. That's really going to help you out. So first of all, let's talk about where you want to fish a frog, and then I'm going to show you some of my favorite frogs and give you some tips on rigging and fishing them. There's two scenarios where frogs work good this time of year. Obviously, number one is vegetation. Lily pads, duckweed, floating grass, hydrilla, milfoil, any place where another lure won't work because of the vegetation's too thick, because that's one of the things about a frog is it's weedless. So the floating vegetation is the obvious one. It's the time tested. Everybody's been around it. One tip that I will give you guys for frog fishing and floating vegetation is every type of floating vegetation is different in terms of its density and how the fish use it. Say for example, if you're fishing this floating duckweed type stuff, that is thin and it can be completely covered up with no holes whatsoever, and it's thin enough where the bass will come up through that stuff and bust it with no openings. As your cover becomes thicker, like say for example you got a lily pad field, or you have some floating, or you have matted hydrilla or milfoil that's on the surface there that's thick underneath it, that is when the holes become more of an option or more of a factor. You have to concentrate on holes. And the key on holes is getting the right hole. You don't want a hole that's too big. You don't want one that's too small. Let's say you look out over a grass field out there and you see some holes this big around, you see some that big around. The best hole for a frog on some type of matted vegetation is just about the same size as a dinner plate, maybe a little bit smaller than a dinner plate, maybe something about like that. That is a perfect type of an ambush point for the fish. So try to concentrate on those holes that are like 6 to 12 inches across is going to be a perfect hole to cast into. And also, once you do get in a hole, say for example it's thick and you're working it up and then your frog's in a little hole this big, let that frog sit there a little bit and just twitch it with your rod tip. Just twitch it in one place, get it just going like that a little bit, and sometimes that'll draw that fish in to catch it with that. Now, if you have a lake that does not have vegetation in it, which is the majority of the lakes in the country do not have vegetation, it's all about shallow shade. That is the whole key to catching them on frogs. You're not going to catch hardly any bass on frogs unless you're throwing a frog this time of year around some type of shade if you don't have vegetation. So therefore, wherever shade is at, you have a chance of catching fish, especially if that shade is isolated. So I'm not talking about getting on a big shady bank that's 8 o'clock in the morning and there's shade everywhere. I'm talking about up in the day, like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock during the day, when there's little shade pockets, maybe this big around, like underneath a tree or off the side of a boat.